You expect strangers to be unpredictable, but neighbors are different. They live close enough to see everything. And mine did something I couldn't ignore. Every night, he stood at the window, watching me. Neighbors are supposed to feel safe, familiar faces, houses you pass every day, people who live just close enough to notice if something is wrong. But that closeness can go both ways, because when someone lives right next to you, they don't need to search for information. They can just watch, learn your habits, study your routines. And sometimes, the person living closest to you is the one paying the most attention. These are 3 true nightmares of neighbors. Nightmare 1. When I moved into my apartment, the first thing I noticed was how close the buildings were. Across from my living room window was another unit. Same layout, same size. Close enough that if both windows were open, you could probably hear someone talking. At first, it didn't bother me. People kept their curtains closed most of the time, except for one apartment, directly across from mine. The man who lived there never closed his blinds. At night, his apartment was always lit up, and he was always there, sitting in a chair near the window, facing outward. At first, I didn't think much of it. People sit near windows all the time. But after a few days, I started to notice something strange. No matter what time I looked, he was there. Morning, afternoon, late at night, always sitting in the same spot, always facing my direction. At first, I told myself he probably couldn't even see me clearly. The angle wasn't perfect, the lighting wasn't great. But then one night, I tested something. I turned off all the lights in my apartment and stood just out of view from the window. Then I leaned slightly into the frame, just enough to see him. And the moment I did, he leaned forward, like he'd been waiting for me to appear. My chest tightened. I stepped back immediately. The next night, I tried something else. I moved quietly to the side of the window, slowly, carefully, and peeked out again. He wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing, closer to the glass, looking directly into my apartment. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. He wasn't just sitting near the window. He was watching, tracking movement, waiting for me to come into view. I started keeping my blinds closed after that, all the time, day and night. But a few days later, I noticed something that made it worse. Even with my blinds shut, he still sat in that chair, facing my window, like he didn't need to see me anymore, like he already knew I was there. It's one thing to feel like someone is watching you. It's another thing to realize they've been paying attention long enough to learn your routine. Before we get to the second nightmare, take a moment to like and subscribe to Nightmare Central for more true horror stories every week, because the next story isn't about being watched from a distance. It's about someone getting closer. Nightmare 2. I started noticing the sounds about a week after I moved in. At first, it was subtle, just faint noises through the wall. My apartment shared a wall with the unit next door. Old building, thin walls. It wasn't unusual to hear movement, footsteps, cabinets opening. But then I started hearing something else. Tapping, soft, irregular, like someone lightly knocking on the wall. At first I ignored it, but it kept happening, usually at night, always when everything else was quiet. One night, out of curiosity, I tapped back, just once. There was a pause, then 2 taps in response. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was coincidence. But the next night, it happened again. Soft tapping. I didn't respond this time, but it kept going. for almost 5 minutes. Slow, deliberate. Then it stopped. A few days later, I noticed something even worse. I was talking on the phone in my living room. Nothing important, just a casual conversation. But later that night, I heard the same tapping again. Then, faintly through the wall, a voice, low, barely audible, repeating something. I moved closer to the wall, held my breath, and listened. The voice was repeating words from my earlier phone call, phrases I had said hours before, word for word. My entire body went cold. I stopped making phone calls in that room after that. But the tapping didn't stop. It just changed. Sometimes it would start right after I got home, sometimes late at night, sometimes when I was completely still, like whoever was on the other side knew exactly when I was there. I reported it to the landlord. They said the unit next door was vacant, had been for months. A neighbor who watches you is disturbing. A neighbor who listens is worse. But the final nightmare tonight is what happens when a neighbor doesn't need to watch or listen anymore, because they've already found a way inside. Nightmare 3. When I first moved into the house, the landlord mentioned something casually. He said the previous owner had given a spare key to the neighbor, just in case. He laughed it off, said it was an old habit, a small town thing, people looking out for each other. I didn't think much of it at the time, until things started moving. At first it was small, a chair slightly out of place, a cabinet left open, things I'd told myself I must have forgotten. But then one night I noticed something I couldn't explain. I always left my bedroom door closed, always. But when I got home from work one evening, it was open, just a few inches, enough to see into the dark room beyond. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if I had left it like that. I couldn't. That night, I started paying closer attention, checking things before I left, taking pictures on my phone, the position of objects, doors, drawers, lights. The next day, when I got home, things had changed again. Small things, but different. The pictures on my phone confirmed it. Someone had been inside. I changed the locks the next day, every single one. Front door, back door, windows, everything. For a few days, nothing happened. No changes, no movement. I started to feel relieved, like maybe it was over. Then one night, around 2 a.m., I woke up. Not to a noise, not to a sound, just a feeling, the kind that pulls you out of sleep instantly, like something is wrong. I lay there in the dark, listening. At first there was nothing. Then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. My entire body locked up. I hadn't made a sound, hadn't moved, but whoever was out there was inside my house. I reached slowly for my phone, trying not to make any noise. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. Then, the handle moved, just slightly, testing. The door didn't open, because I had locked it. There was a pause. Then I heard something that still haunts me, a quiet voice, right outside the door, almost a whisper. You changed the locks. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't make a sound. After a few seconds, the footsteps moved away. And then, nothing. The police never found anyone. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of how they got in. But a few days later, I found something that made it worse. Tucked under my doormat, a key, old, worn, and taped to it was a small note, in messy handwriting. You forgot one. Neighbors live closer than anyone else, close enough to see you, close enough to hear you, close enough to learn everything about your life without ever speaking to you. And sometimes, that closeness becomes something else entirely. This was Nightmares of the Neighbors. And one thing you can trust is Nightmare Central to bring you more true horror stories. Sleep carefully.